Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order our work sessions for today, February 2nd, a little after 9 o'clock in the morning. And Gary, it looks as if we're starting off with the HB 2001 implementation. And can you get us rolling with that, please?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Schrader. So first, all commissioners are present today. Chair Smith is here and has asked Vice Chair Schrader to chair these early sessions this morning. So Commissioner Schrader will chair this first policy session, which, yes, is Land Use Housing Strategies Project, Phase 2, House Bill 2001 Implementation, File ZDO-282. If we could please bring in our staff, Martha Fritzie and Jennifer Hughes from Transportation and Development. They are our main presenters today, so we'll pause just a moment for them to come in the room, please.
So can I make a comment?
Yes, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit concerned. I understand the scheduling stuff and we moved it up, an hour. But what I didn't realize that it was more than just moving it up an hour, or adding an hour to it, that I think some of the people that were interested in HB 2001 at 10 o'clock were going to be here at 10 o'clock. So, obviously this is recorded. And so I got a little comfort there, but I just wanted to just acknowledge that we noticed it well in advance that it'd be at 10 o'clock, but I'm not going to make any waves about that. Just want to just acknowledge that. I just thought that we'd start or carry over yesterday's sessions starting at 9 and then continue on with the agenda as planned. But
Paul, I thought that too. I thought we were going to start with Arpa this morning, and then this morning I realized this. Our sessions ran long yesterday. We did a lot of good work, so we had some spillover, and that's why we're allowing for the Wednesday morning meetings. But somebody's scheduled. I don't know. It just happened that way, but thank you.
It's on me, commissioners. I did it because we had staffing conflicts with ARPA where we could not have the staff present to present to you at 9. So we made the shift. We did give notice online.
Okay.
I apologize, commissioners. That was just the way we could make it work today.
Well, I think that we should go through today, and Paul, your comments are noted, and let's advise people that they can comment at any time, and encourage them to watch the taping of this so they can get back to us with whatever they need to tell us. We're gonna have to be flexible today, folks. So, all right.
And commissioners, you are not making a decision today. You're simply giving input to staff. So there'll be more time if members of the public want to give you feedback. That's
great. No decision, so there will be plenty of time.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. Jennifer and Martha Fritzie, please go ahead.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm the planning director. I'm just going to kind of introduce this, and then I'll turn it over to principal planner Martha Fritzie, who's the project manager and knows a lot more about all of this than I do. I do want to kind of address the comments you were making, though, to let you know that thanks to our excellent staff and PGA, Ellen Rogelin specifically did send a notice out yesterday to everyone on the interested parties list, letting them know that this had been rescheduled and indicating that a recording would be posted. So I hope that makes everybody feel a little bit better about it. So thank you very much to Ellen for doing that. So just to kick us off, we are here to give you an update on phase 2 of the Land Use Housing Strategies Project, which focuses on the county's implementation of the state's middle housing legislation. We've talked to you about this before. I know you're all familiar with the topic, but Martha's going to get into quite a bit more detail. And really, we're here to kind of mostly to give you an update, but there are 2 questions posed in the policy session worksheet. One being just generally, do you think staff is on the right track with the approach we're taking on the code amendments, given, the really pretty prescriptive sideboards that the state has given us? And then secondly, there is kind of a less well understood provision in the House bill where the county is required to consider, not to adopt, but to consider some strategies for making middle housing more affordable, strategies that are not land use, but more financial. And so Martha will get into that a bit, but we're wanting to find out what format you would like to actually conduct that required consideration. And we've given you a couple of options for that. So We would anticipate this presentation to take about 20 minutes. Martha's going to be as efficient as possible, but it should give you, I hope, plenty of time to talk it through. And with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to Martha.
Thank you. And I'm just going to jump right in and share my screen and get through a long PowerPoint, but I am really going to not only talk fast because I do, but try to just lightly touch on a lot of the topics. I'm happy to circle back and answer questions in more detail on anything that we have here today. So can you see my presentation? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So as was mentioned, we're here to talk about House Bill 2001. Very briefly, this shouldn't be new to anyone, but just to jog everyone's memory a little bit, this was legislation in 2019 that requires the county to allow middle housing in all of its urban single-family neighborhoods. By middle housing, we're talking about these housing types illustrated here: duplexes, triplexes, quadflexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. We are required to comply with this law by June 30th of 2022. And that's what we are working on right now on that timeline and hoping to meet it. So urban single-family neighborhoods include the zoning districts listed here on the left, those areas identified in yellow on the screen here. This is McLaughlin, this is 82nd to I-205. I think it's important to note that all of these cities that are gray in here also have to comply with this. This isn't unique to Clackamas County. All of the cities have to comply with House Bill 2001, allow for middle housing in their urban single-family neighborhoods, and have the same rules and same deadlines as us. So what does comply with House Bill 2001 mean? Well, it means we need to adopt standards into our zoning and development ordinance consistent with the state rules, or we can choose to, or if we do not do anything, we will be forced to use the middle housing model code. There is a model code that was drafted. There's some discussion in your packet, and we've had some discussion previously about some of the implications if we were to just simply use or be forced to use the model code. Staff is not recommending going that route, and therefore we have been working on developing our own zoning and development ordinance regulations for middle housing. And really have been working on two prongs of this project. And so one, we've been doing the technical work on the zoning code and the comprehensive plan. And the other prong is we've been doing and are continuing to do a fair amount of public outreach and have conversations with various groups about middle housing. And so the first piece of this is the more technical work, the zoning and development ordinance amendments. It's important to keep in mind as we're thinking about talking about all of this and as we're looking at zoning code changes, there are a lot of things that the county has no control over, including the housing types, those 5 middle housing types, including, where we have to allow those housing types. Middle housing has to be allowed in single family neighborhoods through the same review process as a single family dwelling, essentially a building permit. Obviously, if there are other land use issues, other overlays that require land use approval, just like they would for a single family home, those things can be applied to middle housing, but generally it's a building permit. Duplexes, by and large, need to be treated exactly like a single family. There's little to no wiggle room for citing and design standards for duplexes. They need to be the same as for single family. And then I throw housing price up here. Because as we go out and talk to the public, the price of housing often comes up. I think it's important to keep in mind that our zoning code does not regulate housing price. We are asked a lot how much these houses will cost. We don't know. The market regulates that. However, the whole premise behind middle housing is that it's those housing types that are between the large single family dwelling that is very expensive right now, we're all aware, and then the small, big multifamily developments. These are the houses in between. They're smaller. They are naturally more affordable, hopefully, because they are smaller in size and should be less expensive to build. And so we're talking about more affordable housing that's naturally occurring, more options for homeowners or renters to move into these housing types that are in between the big expensive and the big tall dense housing. So where do we have some control? Well, the state rules allow us some control within certain parameters about how big a site can be for certain middle housing types to be developed. We can establish a minimum lot size for some of them. I think we talked briefly about this at our last meeting. And so we can apply some additional protections in natural resource areas and floodplains, and in some cases actually prohibit some of the middle housing types. Parking, we have very limited flexibility, but there is some, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then some of the siting and design standards. And by siting and design standards, by siting, I mean like the size and location of buildings and other features, how far they are from the property lines, how much of the lot they can cover. And design is design, it's how buildings look. We have some limited ability to make choices on siting and design standards for some middle housing. And so there are going to be a lot of changes to our zoning and development ordinance. I am not going to get into a lot of details about those right now. Over 20 sections in our zoning code are going to be touched. Some of the most substantive changes are going to be to these sections listed up here. We, of course, have to add definitions for these middle housing types. We don't actually have some of them in our zoning code now. We have to allow for them in our urban residential districts in section 315. That's the section that talks about lot coverage and setbacks and minimum densities for various housing types. And I think importantly, there's going to be a new section in our zoning code, section 845. This section will include siting and design standards specific to triplexes, quadflexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. And those are the middle housing types where, like I said, we have some choice. We have a little bit of wiggle room and flexibility with our standards. In your packet, in one of the attachments in your packet, there's a lot more detail about the current draft of proposed changes of each of these zoning code sections. And I am happy to circle back to this and answer any questions about it as we move into discussion. And then, of course, there's going to be some corresponding changes to our comprehensive plan that you'll see primarily to chapter 6, which is our housing chapter. It's incredibly outdated. It has population forecasts that go through 2010 right now. And there's a lot of other changes that need to happen in that chapter to sort of bring it up to date and to come into compliance with the state law and to start looking at housing and our whole comprehensive planning with an eye toward equity a little bit more. And then chapter 4 is going to have some changes. And so as we are working on those zoning code changes and where there's flexibility, how do we decide? Like, how do we get to these? How do we know what regulations to put in there? And to aid us in that, how do we decide issue, we have done a lot of outreach and we've had a lot of conversations. We have had conversations with the Planning Commission. We've had 2 pretty long work sessions with our Planning Commission, one in October, one just about a week-ish ago, where we got into a lot of detail about specifics about minimum lot sizes that we could apply to certain middle housing, about parking, of course, about sidewalks, generally direction for siting and design standards. And we got into some specifics even about the comprehensive plan goals and the ZDO amendments. And we have wrapped all of that feedback into our proposals as we're moving them forward. We also have been doing a fair amount of public outreach and are continuing to do public outreach. This here is kind of the tip of the iceberg for our public outreach. We did put out an online survey. It was posted for about 5 weeks in 5 different languages. It was pushed out through social media, to our interested parties list and all of the other standard avenues that PGA uses that don't know all of them. A lot of people heard about it. We got 342 responses. We got responses in each of those languages as well. We received a grant last year from the state to contract with a consultant so we could engage in some multicultural outreach and not just our typical outreach, but reaching specifically out to communities and having meetings with them in Russian, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. And so we have had a round of focus group meetings and gotten a lot of really good feedback from those groups as well. And at the very end of this, I'll talk about outreach moving forward. This is what we've done to date. Like I said, there's still a lot going on. Generally, there has been a mixed response to middle housing, and it's not surprising. And there's a lot of excitement around it, and there's a lot of concern around it. We always start these conversations with our various groups just sort of about familiarity and how you feel about it, and what are the benefits and what are the concerns. And by and large, the most frequently mentioned benefit that we've heard is that it would provide more affordable housing, more options for home buyers. And I think importantly, one thing to keep in mind as we are thinking about this is that, we know that a lot of our urban single-family neighborhoods are largely built out. And middle housing is, at least initially, is going to be a lot of infill development. And, a lot of people that we talk to have found think it's important that middle housing is going to be important for existing property owners and to enable them to add to their property and provide additional income for them potentially. And so not all the middle housing that's coming in is going to be the big developer coming in and developing on a lot. There's definitely a lot of opportunities for infill development. And then there's other benefits mentioned and certainly concerns. Not surprisingly, the largest concerns that we've heard are concerns for overcrowding of neighborhoods and concerns about not providing enough parking. Other concerns that have been mentioned, there are discussion groups and our focus groups expressed a fair amount of concern about or interest in not just sort of paving over the area, which nobody is proposing to do certainly, but just concern about protecting open spaces and trees and green spaces and being able to have spaces for gardens and things like that. And then of course there are concerns about middle housing not fitting into neighborhood character. I should note with a small caveat that our survey response was not necessarily a representative sample from the county. The responses were primarily made up of existing single family homeowners. And so I guess this concern that's listed here in the last bullet is not particularly surprising. But it is something to keep in mind as we are thinking about specific siting and design standards for middle housing. We all do want it to fit into neighborhoods. And then as we start talking about the areas where we have some flexibility, I put them into sort of two buckets. And so I made an attempt, sorry, that's my phone. I made an attempt on page 6 of your packet. There is a very large table, you can't see it, that talks about some 6 specific items that we discussed with the Planning Commission and with our discussion groups, and trying to get direction on really how we want to go. And there's this one column that sort of is okay, listen, we have to allow this. Do we really just do the minimum that we have to do to allow it? Or really are there some regulations that we think are important that are different than what we would apply to single family, that we should apply to middle housing in order to provide more flexibility or encourage or even incentivize middle housing? And again, we got a very mixed response to this. There were a lot of people who are concerned about providing too much flexibility for middle housing and sort of the negative impacts like to the land and to the neighborhood. And then there are some that really are very supportive of that and said it's a trade-off to increase the amount of affordable housing. And so I'm just going to very, very briefly touch on each of these 6 items. In the table, I tried to make it very clear, sort of the options, what we heard from the survey respondents, what we heard from all of our discussion group meetings, what we heard from the Planning Commission, and then the last column of staff comments is how we are proposing to address it in the zoning code moving forward. And again, I don't want to get down into the nuances of each of these options, but I am happy to circle back and answer questions at the end of this if you would like me to. There is this question out there of whether or not we should allow duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes to be detached. It seems odd, and it kind of is, but this was a big item that came up even during the rulemaking, and a lot of jurisdictions are going down the road. I think that we by and large heard that triplexes, quadplexes, and duplexes, for the most part, should be attached, is how we traditionally think of them, as attached units, not separate small units on a property, for a number of reasons. Each of these items, there's a lot of pros and cons that were discussed for all of the options, and I'm just going to sort of summarize what we've heard. You'll note here that we did have some support for detached duplexes. Currently, there's 2 houses allowed on a property right now anyway. If you wanted to do a detached option, you could have an accessory dwelling unit. So at this point in time, we're not going down the road with our code amendments of having detached plexes. We require them all to be attached. So by and large, we heard that there should be a minimum lot size established for triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. We discussed that with you and the Planning Commission a couple of times. And so that is the way that we are going with our code amendments right now. When it comes down to other citing standards, we heard keep them the same as for single family. So have the same setbacks, keep the same lot coverage requirements, or don't allow middle housing to have a larger footprint than single family. And that's generally a direction that we are going with our code amendments. Sidewalks, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I imagine we're going to have some discussion about this afterward. There's an option at the county, as you're aware, for a fee in lieu of, and so some developments, some residential developments, if they are proposing 3 or fewer units, have an option right now to pay a fee instead of building the sidewalk. That fee goes toward building sidewalks in other areas of the county. Our current proposal is to not change that, and any middle housing, just like other housing right now, that's proposing 4 or more units would have to build the sidewalk and couldn't pay that fee. This is certainly a hot topic of discussion, and we could discuss whether or not that's appropriate. And then finally, parking. The rules do not allow us to require more than 1 off-street parking space per unit. And they do allow us the option of counting on-street parking toward that minimum parking requirement. We have heard overwhelmingly that we should not do that. And so that is not something that you will see in the proposal at this point. I think it's important to note that a developer or a property owner could provide more off-street parking than that, but we simply cannot require more than 1 per unit. And so that's just really the highlight of the things that are in the table on page 6. As we are moving forward, I said we're at sort of at the tip of the iceberg of our public outreach. February is gonna be a very busy month for us in doing public outreach. We've got more discussion meetings. We're talking to the CPO and Hamlet leaders on the evening of February 7th. February 22nd in the evening, we're having a virtual Q&A session. Last Friday, we sent out notice and an invitation to this virtual Q&A session to over 21,000 people. We sent out over 21,000 postcards to owners of every property that was within that yellow area on the map, every property that's zoned in one of the urban single family zones that would be affected by these these changes by the middle housing. And then of course we have a series of public hearings before the Planning Commission and before you, where we will consider all of the zoning code amendments and comprehensive plan amendments that would be proposing to implement this. And then finally, Jennifer touched on these other items that we need to consider. And I don't know if we want to get into this now or maybe just circle back to these specific items at the end. House Bill 2001 does require the county to consider at least these items listed up here in order to potentially increase affordability of middle housing. I will note that none of these items are things that would show up in the zoning code. And so how and when we consider these items, we can talk about, but it would certainly involve coordination with other departments in the county. And that, at this point, is the end of my presentation. Let me get out of the screen share. And I am more than happy to address any questions.
Well, I want to thank you all for such a thorough presentation and all the work you've done so far. And I will say, I think the outreach has been extremely impressive at this point. So thank you for that. And colleagues, I'm going to open it up for any questions. And I'm looking for hands.
Commissioner Savas.
All right, Commissioner Savas.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I'd like to say we've opened up a can of worms, or the legislature opened up a can of worms, but this is way bigger than a can. So there's a lot to talk about here and not enough time. And I certainly don't want to occupy all the time, but I do have a number of concerns. So on the latter slide, I have a question. I don't know if maybe staff in the background could just answer this later if they don't have the answer right now. So my question is, looking at waiving requirements for sidewalks and or what property taxes can do and not do, or waiving SDCs. I mean, I've got a lot of concern about all of that. So I have a question that maybe our transportation staff can answer, and just put the answer in the chat. And that is, can property tax dollars be spent on off-street improvements like roads, or the roads themselves, sidewalks, drainage, those kinds of things? Can property tax dollars be spent? I do know there's basically a principle of state law that gas tax dollars cannot be spent on, have restrictions, and property tax dollars can't be spent not on roads. So I want to get clarity on both sides of that, because waiving issues like sidewalks and drainage is a huge issue. And your earlier map that you put up there with the yellow, and the gray, obviously we're only can enforce or make these adjustments and make these code changes in the unincorporated areas. The cities have to do that on their own. And the largest area on that map has most of the yellow, and the concentration of yellow is in the area where I live, Oak Grove, Jennings Lodge, Oakfield Ridge, River Road area, Westwood, areas around Gladstone. It's a huge area, about 50 some odd thousand people all combined. And a lot of that has no shoulder, it has a shoulder, has no hard shoulder, no curb. There's no curb. A lot of it there's very little curbing, sidewalks, and it's not so much the curb or the sidewalk. It is an issue, but a curb and the drainage. And so one of my biggest concerns about putting a lot of housing very close together, and concentrating that in larger than it was originally conceived, is some of the fire risk. When we saw the devastation here in Colorado recently about the fire that just swept through and just devastated hundreds of homes, I always worry about that even prior to this, that we have a huge tree canopy, and that canopy under a out of control fire can fuel, and with housing nearby and a lot of attention towards climate, a lot of attention towards protecting the tree canopy, certainly this would result in, if there's a lot of development in there, that a lot of trees, being, cut down, as well as the trees trying to be blended in and saved. So that just really puts a lot of fuel very close together. And I'm hoping, I don't know what level of input we're going to get from the fire districts in the area, but I'm also concerned not only about their input and making sure that we have some protection and spacing that gives us protection, but also the fire apparatus itself, accessing driveways, accessing the street. I had a fire here about 3 houses down from me several years ago, and the fire truck sank because part of the wheels went on the shoulder in the county right of way, but there was no sidewalk and there was no really good shoulder, and the fire truck sank on its approach up to the driveway and was stuck there for until the next day, I believe, if I recall correctly. And so I just have concerns about access for heavy fire truck apparatus. Some homes have not even enough space between their property line and their house to actually put a driveway, to drive through there. So I just see a lot of challenges and just packing everything together so tightly that there will be the risk. So I've said a lot. Those are just concerns. But I'll just stop there and listen to everyone else.
Thank you, Paul. I think you've made some really good points, particularly about really getting some input from our fire districts with this. I think the issue at hand, though, is that this is dare I say, a mandate from the legislature. And so in many ways, I think our hands are somewhat tied, and that the flexibility they've given us, I would suggest that any flexibility they've given us, we use to the good and not to the bad. And if we don't, my understanding is if we don't adopt anything at all, we will be hamstrung with the state code. Is that correct, folks? Am I saying that correctly, Jennifer? Yeah. So we're actually trying in a way to mitigate what could be really some seriously difficult issues as we become more and more dense. So I think we do understand that piece of it. I, for one, have us even consider to waive SDC's property tax exemptions or tax freezes. Well, that's nice, but remember, that's our revenue source. So they're asking us, I find this a little bit top down from them. They're asking us to waive our revenue sources that we need to have in order to give services to people with no compensation. So that's great. That once again, we would be really tied to providing services for folks. But if we do waivers of that sort, it'll reduce our ability to do so. So those are my comments. And does anyone want to make any comments or questions?
Chair Smith has up next.
Okay, great. I'm for some reason I'm not seeing hands. So
that's okay. That's okay. I was challenged as well on seeing everybody's hands. Don't worry about it. Okay. Gary's there. I think, Paul, you make some excellent points, as does Martha. Let's take this into context for a moment. I believe a lot of this legislation coming about housing really stems from Senate Bill 100. And when Senate Bill 100 was passed decades ago, it really locked down the available land that people and governments could use to build on. And this could be an attempt to try to remedy that, recognizing, gee, we need more land and we don't have it because of legislation. So I agree that we should go ahead and pass something here today, whatever the will of the board is. And staff has a recommendation. And to use as much flexibility, like Martha says, as we can. With that in mind, being in the legislature, I always go back to what it was the original intent of a law. And you become so focused on what your goal is, you don't realize when you do something over here, there's an adverse effect over here. You just don't see it. So I'm wondering in the long session that's coming up, let's say we go ahead and pass this, and it's not going to be implemented right away. We go back to the legislature and say, hey, Clackamas County passed this. We like the fact we can have more housing, blah, blah, blah. But we see some problems with fires, if that's the case, with whatever issue, Paul, you brought up, with any issues that the commissioners have. I would try to approach it that way. It's whatever financial implications that we have to do with this. I think these problems need to be addressed, and I think that our team could possibly do it in the 23 session. That would be my recommendation. Thanks.
Commissioner Shull has his hand raised.
All right, Commissioner Shull, you're up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, until we can get some relief from the restrictive Oregon land use laws and Senate Bill 100, this middle housing is going to help provide the housing we need in Clackamas County. Now, a couple quick questions. One, does the Planning Commission have a feel for how fast this might take off? How many of these middle housing projects might be built once we approve this? And that would be interesting to know. I don't personally think that this is going to take off real fast. And the other question I have is when somebody comes in and submits an application for a building permit for, like, say, a quadplex in what is now a single family zoned development, will there be a chance for the neighbors to have input on that application?
Sure.
Martha or
Yeah. So it of course is very, very hard to project how fast development will happen. I can say that I think you are right. It's we have a largely already developed urban area. It will be infill development initially and maybe always. And there aren't a lot of big parcels right now that could be built on. And so there have been some numbers thrown out there, some analysis done through other avenues. They weren't done by us, that are estimating sort of a 1 to 3% rate of redevelopment in these areas. But again, I don't know what that's based on. And then when you're talking about a quadplex building permit, the answer is no. When building permits come in, we process them according to the specific standards, setbacks, lot coverage, design standards, building codes, fire codes, things like that. They are reviewed by staff. It's not something that is sent out for notice to the neighbors. They can certainly call if they see something going on and access all the information.
Okay, I understand. Well, with that in mind, your brief has been very thorough. I see your slide with the events between now and the time you come back in April and May to the board. And so I think you ought to proceed with your draft ZDO amendments to implement HB 2001. I think you're on the right track.
Thank you, Commissioner Shull. I would agree with that, because my understanding is, Gary, you said we don't have to make an actual final decision today. There's still planning commission, there's still more input to be had, and that the decision-making points won't be until May. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right.
So simply seeking your input and feedback today on the plans you've heard so far. Commissioner Fisher has her hand raised.
All right, Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Vice Chair Schrader.
Yeah,
I'm pretty much in agreement with kind of where we're going today in our recommendation. I just have some bigger picture issues, and Chair Smith alluded to it somewhat. I'm curious if this was all done before there was COVID, and then COVID happened, and there is people are even more aware of sort of the value of space since COVID. Has there been any talk at the legislative level to re-look at this due to what we know now that we didn't know then? That's my first question. Then I have a couple more.
So yes, this all was conceived pre-COVID. It was the 2019 legislature, and the main premises, my understanding of the main premise behind this, there really two, is to create more opportunities for more affordable housing, and to start to address past exclusionary practices in single family neighborhoods. And so those were the main reasons for the legislation. Again, my understanding. And I think that this idea of COVID certainly puts a new level of consideration of how we would actually safely develop and fit this into our neighborhoods. I don't know that I could answer any legislature questions. Maybe Jennifer can hop in.
I was actually replying to Commissioner Savis's question about property taxes. So what was the question about legislature? Sorry.
No, I just wonder if there's any proposals to kind of rethink some of this at the legislative level. I do know that there's going to be an effort to look at Senate Bill 100, but
my sense, there's not a lot of land use legislation circulating in the short session. There's really just a couple of bills, nothing particularly earth-shaking. But I haven't sensed anything in what I've seen in terms of proposals that would suggest they'd be going backwards. Backwards in the sense of like rolling back the legislation. The tenor seems to be more housing wherever we can get it. That's okay. How I would characterize it.
And then my next question is, so we have Clackamas County, we're a county, and then we have 15 cities within Clackamas County that does their own zoning. Is there any effort to have anything that is the same across the different jurisdictions so that those that are looking to develop don't have to deal with different rules and different just because they do now, they have to deal with it. But in regards to this, are we coordinating at all with our other jurisdictions?
So at a technical staff level, there's been a lot of coordination with other jurisdictions, but quite frankly, everyone's zoning code is a little bit different. I think that for middle housing, this is probably going to be the most similar across jurisdictions. If only because we are so limited in what we are allowed to do under state law. And so I guess one benefit of that would be for a developer, there might be more consistency across the jurisdictions. But it's really hard to coordinate zoning codes that closely because even just the simple structure of them is often very different. And particularly with an area as large as unincorporated Clackamas County versus, cities like a Gladstone or, a Westland that are not nearly as large.
And oftentimes, some of the cities, maybe you can answer this for me, staff, actually works directly with our planning department because you add capacity for them. Isn't that so? Or
we have two contracts. We contract with Estacada, although Estacada isn't large enough to be subject to the regulations we're talking about today, and Gladstone. So yes, we do have some work. We work with them in that respect. I guess I would say too, and I in terms of there is this model code out there. So there are in theory some things that everyone could adopt for consistency. And the minimum compliance standards and things are the same for everyone. So inevitably, there's going to be a lot of consistency across all these jurisdictions. But what we find is, there are things we really do want to do differently, like requiring the one on, off-street parking space and those things. And so I think you get into some questions about whether we would want to lose our flexibility to do those things in terms of trying to be consistent with all jurisdictions. There's some competing priorities there, I think.
Okay. And then my last question, just to kind of walk us through. So in Clackamas County, we have all of our area that's within the urban growth boundary. And we have our unincorporated areas and our urbanized areas, mostly along the McLaughlin corridor and around Clackamas Town Center. Wondering, as we go out east, and the idea is that any new development that will happen will be an annexation into Happy Valley. But how does this all relate together? So we do this is there. How does that affect? I call the area out towards Damascus and all of that area sort of the final frontier of development. And it's why we are working so hard. And Commissioner Savis has sounded the bell of we need the Sunrise Phase 2 because this is where it's all going to happen. How does all of this interrelate together as we're looking to plan and preserve our quality of life moving forward?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I think I understand your question, and if I get this wrong, please let me know. But Your basic point, do we expect the final frontier to be developed by Happy Valley? I think the answer is planning staff expects that. I mean, ultimately those decisions are set by the board, but that has been the direction. And certainly you just recently approved a change to the Happy Valley Urban Growth Management Agreement that would suggest the city is at least going to take the part that's closest to their city limits. Now, there's still a lot of infrastructure questions about the part that's further east that I don't think any of us are prepared to answer at this point. Because that area is in the urban growth boundary, it is technically subject to these middle housing requirements, but not until urban zoning is applied and there's actual public facilities available. So, that final frontier will have to allow middle housing in single family. They won't have single family neighborhoods. They'll have neighborhoods that would be mixed between middle housing and single family from the very beginning, unless there's a change, at the state level, like we've sort of talked about. So, but we would assume that those rules would be implemented by Happy Valley. And again, they would be very similar to what we're talking about today.
You answered my question right on the nose.
Good.
Perfect. Thank you.
I do hear it.
Commissioner Savas has his hand raised.
Yes, Mr. Savas.
Yeah, so thank you for the answer to my question earlier, Jennifer. So the answer is, as I recall it being, but I wanted to make sure I was right. And that is that basically property tax dollars cannot be spent on roads. And of course, we already know that gas tax dollars can't be spent on anything but road type purposes. So that's designed by the state. And so when we talk about waiving fees or so forth, and you look at the level or where we land on this as far as sidewalks or, adequate road shoulder reinforcement that can support fire apparatus and parking and all those things, we got to be really, really careful. So I support going forward into, making whatever adjustments that we plan to make to get in front of this as best we can. I appreciate Commissioner Fisher's question and response from staff back about, that frontier out there. I think that if the legislature was to craft language to build more housing and they looked at Clackamas County only, I think they should have funded the Sunrise Corridor Phase 2 and Phase 3, because that would have really opened up a lot of land for development and really been really the spark that we really need to really get a lot of housing. And I've been advocating for that in our predecessors from commissions back all the way back into the late 80s and 90s, spoke about that and really thought that was a way of addressing the housing. And Metro in turn brought in 13,000 acres in the UGB out in that frontier in the year 2000, but never provided the infrastructure, especially when it comes to the roads, or never allowed us to get, or helped us, get the Sunrise Corridor moving. So with that said, and the segue into transportation, I want to make this one comment, knowing we have a limited time, and that is that when it comes to parking, I think a majority of the legislators from the metro region live in Portland. And Portland has a lot of transit and they have a lot of options. They have bike lanes, they have sidewalks, they have a lot of, not everywhere, right? There are areas that are just as, are very similar to Clackamas County where there's no sidewalks and no curbs and sidewalks in East County, for example. But for the most part, I think people envision the utopia, so to speak, of what I think a lot of advocates think of as this metropolitan high density design, and people don't need a car and they can walk and they can, take a bus and, just go around the corner and boom, there's a bus line. We don't have that in Clackamas County. So when you talk about parking, it looks much different in Portland and areas where there's a lot of transit. We, however, don't have a lot of transit, and there's no one has expressed any means of bringing in the operations and maintenance needed to support transit. So therefore, parking, having a car is a requirement. I mean, that's how people are going to survive. They're either going to go back and forth to work, the doctor's office, take their kids to school. So parking is a huge issue. So therefore, I think we have to really model our situation, and that includes the sidewalks or the curb, at least the curb, and again, access where parking is. I think that's going to be a huge topic for us. And we've already seen areas where parking has been inadequate. and the challenges that people face. But just imagine a car lined with streets, and where's the fire truck go? Right?
Yeah.
Where's the fire truck go? It's going to be in the middle of the street. It's not going to have access to where it needs to go. And I can tell you in places to go look at in this region where, my gosh, if there's a fire, they've got a huge problem and huge challenge. So I'll stop there. I'm really looking forward to the discussion about that. I think we need to think ahead. Our planning commission is going to spend probably, as they normally do, God bless them. They spend a lot of time, and I really appreciate their volunteer service, but they're going to spend a lot of time on this. And I think in kind, I think we are inclined, I'm inclined to spend a lot of time on this as well when it comes back to the commission with their recommendation. I think it really, we need to roll up our sleeves on this more than anything I can think of that we've worked on in the last 11 years I've been here. This one here is going to require some extra time. So I'm hoping when it comes time for the hearing that we block out the time to do a really thorough job on this. Thank you.
So any other questions or comments?
Chair Smith.
We're running short on time. We have 2 more sessions that are an hour each. I appreciate the comments, but we're getting really long on this, and there is a staff recommendation.
Right.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
I don't think you need a motion today, do you?
Gary, do we need a motion?
So I apologize, commissioners. Yes, there is a motion. Staff is just seeking your direction to move forward on this work. You're not making the final decision today, but staff is asking you to move forward on what you've heard today.
Well, thank you for that, because I see recommendation, and staff respectfully recommends the following, and there are several down there. If staff doesn't want us to adopt something, then they should not put it in the paperwork. So I'm fully supportive of staff moving forward. Thank you very much.
So do we need a motion for that and a vote, Gary?
I would ask for a motion, please. Yes.
Okay.
I move to direct staff to move forward and take this to the planning commission and engage the public as required.
Second. I beat ya.
It's been moved by Commissioner Savas and second by Commissioner Fisher. Am I correct with that? So let's call the poll, Shannon. Okay.
Just a second, please. Jennifer, do you have a question before they vote?
There's 2 parts to the recommendation. One is the moving forward part. That's great. The second one is just whether, because we do have to talk about those financial incentives, do you want to do that at a policy session, which was our recommendation? So we hit all 3 at the same time. We'll have somebody there from the assessor's office, or do you want to just do it at like 3 different issues sessions to address the 3? Our recommendation is a policy session.
I think that sounds appropriate. Do I have consensus from our board? Nod heads, thumbs up.
My only comment is that my only comment on that is provided we allot the time, the required time, this is going to be lengthy.
Yes, Paul, I think we will, but we need to amend the motion to move forward.
Okay. So can we get an amendment to the motion, please?
And the language for the motion is exactly what? Or the amendment to the language is what?
Have a policy session.
Yeah,
have a financial incentives.
I'll read it. Direct staff to return to the board at a future policy session to discuss which, if any, of the items identified in part 4 of your packet the board would like to consider related to middle housing in the county.
I accept that amendment.
Second.
So the amendment has been accepted. So now we can call the poll. We're doing this on the up and up, folks. Yay. Okay.
Commissioner Schultz,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye.
It is approved. Thank you, everyone. Well, I'm looking at the time here, I have 9:58. So I guess that gives us 2 minutes to get on to the next meeting. All right, folks, see you in a couple minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
This is the same link, everyone. Don't go away.
Oh, we could should we just stay on, Gary? Or I'm going to go check on my dogs.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break then, commissioners? 5-minute break, but this is the
everyone. Welcome.
all right.
Okay, so we handing it off to Jody to start with?
I'll introduce it, Chair. So thank you, everyone. The next session today is County Clerk Elections Ballot Security Observers Welcome, which is our county's internal audit, did this audit. We have Jody Cochran, the county's Chief Audit Executive, Sherry Hall, the Clackamas County Clerk, and with Sherry Hall is Becky Dahl, our Elections Manager, and Bill Cloran, who is Clerk, Counsel to the Clerk. So with that, Jody, I suspect you'd like to start. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Administrator Schmidt. Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners. For the record, I am Jody Cochran, the county's Chief Audit Executive. Today, I'm very happy to be jointly presenting with Clerk Hall the results of the Elections Ballot Security Audit. I will provide a brief overview during the next 15 minutes of our time, and then the remaining time will be available for comments from Clerk Hall and to address any of your questions. So Shannon, if you could bring up the Elections Ballot Security presentation. The majority of our field work for this engagement was completed in September 2021. We spent a significant amount of time developing the report and coordinating the clerk's management responses and recommendations. The final report was distributed to this board, county administration, the Internal Audit Oversight Committee, and the county clerk on December 10th, 2021. Next slide, please, Helen. Elections are the foundation of our government structure. This engagement is important because public awareness and confidence in each step of an election process supports the integrity of that election. County Internal Audit scoped this review around the May 18th, 2021 special district election. At that time, Clackamas County had over 305,000 registered voters, a 27.94% voter turnout rate, and over 190 individual election contests. This audit was designed to assess the physical custody and security of cast paper ballots. Shannon, next slide, please. Our survey observation and audit efforts spanned a period of time starting in November of 2020. In addition to Clackamas County election processes, we toured other jurisdiction election offices and observed how ballots are secured and the chain of custody and how it's addressed in those jurisdictions. A significant observation was of the excellent election viewing opportunity Clackamas County provides voters through its public observation lobby. The line of sight available at Clackamas County allows a start to finish observation through an intentional, continuous forward workflow design and a very spacious viewing window area. This is in stark contrast to other election facilities that utilize multiple distinct rooms, floors, and even buildings to conduct election ballot processing. So this access and visibility provides a key control in managing election processing risks. In addition to the outside voter viewing access, we noted that Clackamas County benefits from a dedicated group of individuals who consistently return to support elections. As a team, the over 60 temporary workers participating in the May 18th, 2021 election represent a significant resource of experience and skill. The county relies on the service, professionalism, integrity, respect, individual accountability, and trust of each temporary and permanent staff member as key points of control and activity for this risk management and of these election activities. As stated in the report, no instances of deliberate or unethical or fraudulent activity was noted. With the lens of continuous improvement, opportunities for enhanced chain of custody and security controls were noted. These included implementing recommendations from 2 prior election reviews, which continue to be relevant. Shannon, next slide, please. It's important to note what was outside this engagement scope. So information technology processes and risks were not addressed. The engagement did not assess any information technology or advanced electronic systems, including systems used in signature verification or tallying. The engagement did not recount or verify any election results for any contest, and it did not validate the voter registration or eligibility process. Shannon, next slide, please. We made 4 recommendations: 2 to enhance chain of custody controls and processes, and 2 to enforce physical security protocols. To enhance physical security, we recommended the clerk require both ingress and egress door access scans. We noticed the staff did consistently wear identification badges. These badges serve to identify authorized individuals and grant that electronic access to secured areas. During our observations, we noticed that individuals were not uniquely identified when leaving secured areas, and often the individuals were seen entering a secured area without scanning in or being uniquely granted the access. The second recommended enhancement to physical security is securing the loading dock door. The door serves as a delivery point for all returned elections envelopes. Multiple individuals perform election duties in this area. During our observations, this access point was left open and unlocked. Consistently implementing and enforcing established protocols will enhance the physical security of processing areas, protecting county staff, resources, and the election ballots. We recommended enhancements to the chain of custody controls at 2 different points of custody transfer. One at the transfer point between the receipt of non-standard return envelopes and the identification counting of those non-standard return envelopes. And 2 at the transfer point between the sorting and counting of accepted return envelopes and the opening and inspecting of the ballots within the accepted return envelopes. These enhancements will increase the effectiveness of the return envelope and ballot processing and will provide additional assurance that all received return envelopes and ballots are accounted for. Next slide, please, Janet. As noted in the published report, the clerk agrees with 2 of the 4 recommendations. She agrees with the recommendations to enforce physical security protocols. The clerk disagrees with the value of enhancing existing ballot processing controls, which address non-standard return envelopes or the chain of custody between the machine that counts the return envelopes and the human handling of ballots within those returned envelopes. The clerk indicated she believes the additional controls would add more or unnecessary expense to the election process. It is management's right to disagree with audit recommendations, whether in disagreement with the magnitude of the identified risk or the prioritization of spending limited resources to address all risks within that function, department, or organization. Professional standards require that I inform the Internal Audit Oversight Committee and this board if I believe that management is accepting too great a risk or not adequately demonstrating an awareness and consideration of the risk. At this time, I believe the clerk is aware of the potential risks which chain of custody controls would mitigate. And while she does not agree directly with the specific recommendations and recommended actions, I believe the clerk's consideration of our recommendations and potential future process enhancements will add to the effectiveness of elections activity. The status of all 4 recommendations will be monitored in the coming months. If evidence exists that the management is unnecessarily accepting significant risks, I will bring that information to county administration, the Internal Audit Oversight Committee, and this board. Shannon, if you would stop sharing for just a moment. So I want to take this opportunity to mention that I greatly appreciate the clerk's support throughout this audit. Clerk Hall provided access to data, processes, personnel, everything necessary to complete this work. Our independence was not impeded. No attempt to improperly influence or direct the work or outcome was perceived. And I am especially grateful for her presence here today to jointly present these results to you. So Clerk Hall and I are happy to answer any questions you may have about the engagement activity, the reported observations and recommendations and management's responses. Clerk Hall, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I'll wait for the questions. Did you want me to go over why the disagreement on the 2 and the with one of them, we were making some changes to sort of meet what you asked for. So, and that was number 3. And
So
okay, go ahead.
I just want to thank you, Sherry, because that was going to be my question. If you could really expand on.
Okay, at number 3, chain of custody, enhanced receipt protocols for damaged or non-standard return envelopes. And as the machine won't accept them and they get kicked out and have to go into a stack for further investigation, those were just being placed on the counter next to the computer of the person who does that investigation. But we will now be using one of our old ballot return boxes. It used to be in libraries. They're no longer used, but we will have a box in that space where the ballots will go into the box. So there's no chance of them falling off the table or maybe getting lost, which they never have, but it's a more secure way of doing it.
And Sherry, those boxes are locked with a padlock.
They are locked. Is it a padlock? Okay, yes. But you have to understand too, all of the people in that area are hired temporary workers who we trust completely. We don't think there's going to be anybody taking something that they shouldn't. But it is a locked box. And then when Becky, who is the manager, is the one who goes through all of those, they just have to be further looked at to see if they're eligible for going through the system. And if they're not, there's further investigation. And sometimes they're not acceptable and sometimes they are.
Sherry,
Yes.
those ballots cannot go through the machine. Do you then hand count them?
The ballot isn't being read by the sorting machine. And the sorting machine is the first step to capture the signature to go on to signature verifiers. And all signature verifiers are just alone in what they do. And if they don't accept a signature, then it gets passed on to a second, third, or fourth set of eyes. If it can be accepted, it goes through the election process to tally. If it can't be, then that voter gets a letter giving them 14 days to get a signature in that does match.
I think your follow up on that is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. And then with number 4, which is confirm inspection control log batch reconciliations. I'm going to let Becky talk to that.
Hello. For number 4, we believe that our current controls are more than adequate and allow us to reconcile our returned ballots as they should be. The ballots as they come in are run through the sorter or go through the previous process we talked about that we enter by hand. And a number is generated as to how many are in that batch. That number goes with them to the tables where the teams open them. If they need to remove something from the batch, say you returned an envelope for the current election, but you have a previous election's ballot in it, it must be rejected. So if they remove it from the batch, they account for that on the batch cover sheet. It moves on to the room where we scan into our tally system. At that point, when they scan it, the person scanning reconciles that the correct number of ballots is in the batch. If for some reason it doesn't match, the managers of that room and the room where they're opened at the tables will reconcile and discover why it is off and will account for that ballot at that point. So we believe that from where they come into the system at the sorter and where they get scanned into the tally system, we're reconciling those numbers before we actually tally the batch. So we believe that that is more than adequate.
Okay. Any questions from my colleagues? And I have a question, but
Commissioner
go
Savas.
ahead first. Who had their hand up first?
Commissioner Savas, then Chair Smith, and Commissioner Schull.
All righty. Let's go, Commissioner Savas.
Well, thank you. I want to thank both Jody and Sherry Hall and her staff for the work that they've done and doing the audit. And it sounds to me that that the elections office and the clerk here are trying to accommodate both 3 and 4. And so it's not really a black or white issue. It sounds like there's a means of getting to making those improvements. I'll call them improvements. And so I have a question, but back to Jody, our auditor. in response to just her response into what I just heard from the elections clerk and her staff. But the comment I want to make first is that, you know, we all, I think in this country, recognize that there's probably nothing more important about our government than having solid, sound elections that people can trust. When I first got on the commission at that period of time, 10, 11 years ago, there was always talk around the region, around the country, around the state about, you know, elections processes. And I was so impressed when I actually toured the elections office and saw the windows and the inspection areas and realized, my gosh, this is far more transparent than anything I've ever seen. So we have a great system. And the Board of County Commissioners has spent a lot of money, you know, improving and bringing in new machinery asked for by the clerk so that she felt, and we all felt that we were improving processes and having, you know, eliminating human error as best as possible. And so we've taken every measure as a commission to improve and spend the resources to make our process sound. So we acknowledge that, you know, especially in light of the last national election. I think that election integrity is really, really important, and we're doing our best. And if we need to spend a little bit more money or a little bit more time, I'm willing to do that and authorize whatever resources are necessary to do that, as long as it's reasonable, of course. So with that said, Jody, the clerk, I think the clerk has a solution for number 3 about basically secure lock boxes to put those damaged or, you know,
Unreadable.
Yeah, into that box. So if we agree on that, I'd love to hear your, you know, say, yes, that's good. And then on number 2, what is your response to the staff person who just explained that system? Is there a room for improvement?
That's number
there?
4, Paul.
4.
Number 4.
Yeah, number 4, right. That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Savas. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I really appreciate all of your points and absolutely want to make that distinction that did not see any evidence at all of any non-compliance with the expectations of the state and in elections processing at all. Really did was highly impressed with the accessibility, the visibility, would encourage any voter who is interested at all to learn more about the elections process to come and watch the process here. It really has some absolutely fabulous interpretive signage and opportunity and access to the workers to help guide any questions that voters might have as they're observing. So in response to the clerk's response and those items, absolutely, these recommendations are made within a vein of continuous improvement. And I do believe that there's always the opportunity to improve a process and to enhance how we are doing things, especially when we're talking about anything that is manual. To that end, not looking to add unnecessary or unreasonable expenses. So I do believe that the recommendation has value. The response that Clerk and her staff, Sherry and her staff, really worked through. What does it look like to receive non-standard envelopes, and how do we process that very small amount of return envelopes and as a percentage of all of the envelopes that are received? How do we change our processes just a little bit to address those that don't easily fit into the majority of our processes? And so those changes that they are suggesting are really going to, I think, have a good impact and continue to focus on, you know, what kind of dual custody controls do we have, and how do we continue to demonstrate the value and the security of those individual envelopes when they're received. And same thing for that last recommendation in looking at how we reconcile and how do we ensure and how are we able to demonstrate that every envelope that came through has been secured and that any eligible ballot that's within those envelopes has made it to the tally machine, right? And that's the gist of what we're trying to ensure, right? And what we're trying to provide the assurance to the voters that every ballot that is received that is eligible is tallied. And so I do believe that the reconciliation process that they have in place now is serving a purpose. And I think their continued focus on that process and their continued documentation of any sort of exceptional reconciliation activity that has to occur between the ballot tables, the opening tables, and the tallying machine room will support a more transparent assurance that every envelope and every ballot that is accepted is tallied. So I do believe that we're making progress, and that those improvements will be in the vein of continuous improvement and always making our processes that much more effective and efficient. I have a lot of confidence in the changes and implementation that Sherry and her team are suggesting.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you to Clerk Hall and Jody for working that out and getting to a good place.
Thank you.
Chair Smith and Commissioner Schull.
Yes, thank you for that. Sherry, thank you for stepping up to the plate and embracing the audit. No, we are people who really like standardization, and we continue to show up to work and do what we know that to do, but it's important that we can accept improvement too. And I want to thank you for doing that. And I'm going to read from the report. It says here, no instance of deliberate, unethical, or fraudulent activity was noted. And I think that's really important. And I think our citizens really should embrace that statement from our auditor, who really did, I think, great work in trying to understand the system. I think there was a lot of education on both ends of this process. And I think that's very important. Gary Smith, the administrator, and I have talked about, Gary helped me with this, in case my memory isn't right, funding the requirements in the auditor's report to help Sherry go ahead and comply with what's necessary. I also have said that I would like, with board's approval, to have these done before the May primary election of this year. Gary, what's your comment on that?
Yes, Chair. As Commissioner Savas has, as you all said, elections is a key priority for our public. We're the only counties do elections. So whatever resources Clerk Hall needs, as the budget officer, I will propose those to commissioners and you can approve them in short order. So Sherry, whatever you need to implement any of these, we will gladly provide you those resources.
And I just want to say one more thing, Sherry, I know you have your hand up, and that would require facilities to put this at the top of their list. And I know they have quite the wonderful list that we saw. And so, Gary, that's going to take some coordination as well. And I would like you to bring this budget proposal before our board as soon as you're able to and staff is able to figure out approximately how much this is going to cost. Sherry?
And at the audit committee meeting, I said that I would try to come back with some approximates at this meeting. And I have talked to the facilities director who knows about what's going to be approved to be done before the May primary election, which is on May 17th. But of course, we'll start getting ballots back 3 weeks before that. And with the supply chain, it's true that you can't always get the supplies you need to do the jobs you need to do right away. So that will be something that has to be considered. And we haven't come up with an exact plan for the loading dock door, which will be the most expensive piece, but we're going to do that soon. And he'll come up with a cost and then probably try to order the supplies. But that is one area of security that's very important. And partly because when the audit was done, it was during the pandemic. We have a lobby that goes into the elevator lobby in our doors where the door has always been unlocked, but it's no longer unlocked. You have to badge in. And when our temp workers come to work, they don't have badges until they get here and pick it up. So some of them walk through that loading dock door just to come to work. And that has never happened before the pandemic. So that was one of the changes and we need to definitely fix it. And I just want to say too, that with the audit, of course, many things pointed to security. And that is very, very top priority here. And so we are also looking at everything we do with the security in force. And I mentioned that to the staff after the audit, and they, it's like, well, we thought some changes were coming, but it's just kind of maybe prioritize it a little more to do every area of our process with high security in mind. The loading dock door is the biggest piece with that. And with staff, because Chair Smith, I know that you offered to hire as many as we need, but that's not so easy right now either, because we've been having pandemic in the mindset for over 2 years. There's still people who are not okay with less than 6 foot distancing, people that are not okay without masks. And we've even had some of our temps call us ahead of time to ask if certain rules will be in place, because that makes a difference as to whether they want to work as a temp or not. So it's not just a matter of putting out a recruitment and getting them. There's a lot of restrictions that have to be considered. But I'm also assured that Administrator Schmidt will do the same thing he did before and supply county employees to our office to help with the election.
Yes, we discussed that, and I think that's very important. I know that you're up against some restrictions. I would start the recruitment as soon as you can, actually. And
well, any of you who know anyone who wants to do it, send them our way.
Yeah, and I understand it needs to be balanced, as Becky was telling us in our last meeting. It needs to be balanced on
balance per party, right?
On party, and I appreciate that a lot. But I would start your recruitment now and just get it out there in the mindset. I think you can go ahead. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Gary. She needs to just go ahead and figure out what the situation with the dock door is, and don't necessarily wait for this board for approval.
I'm told by facilities that will be top priority.
Yes, and I think it's the consensus of this board going forward. Gary, I don't know if we need to vote on that or not, but again, Sherry, I want to thank you for your willingness. You've embraced this audit. We're moving forward. And quite frankly, number 4, the batch reconciliations, I still don't understand it. So you guys do what you do, and we do what we do. And none of us are experts on this, except for maybe the elections folks and Jody. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
It's called Elections 101. Whenever you're ready for that step, let us know and you can come.
Okay.
And Sherry, I have to add, I have sent people to you. I think I've sent at least 4 volunteers your way. But
I can't hear you, Mark. I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm on mute. I said I've sent a number of volunteers your way.
Thank you. We love that.
They tell me what a great process it is, really, and they're honored to be a part of it. But please know that if anything has to come down to, if it's a fiscal issue, what I've heard from Chair Smith and the rest of the board is that we're more than willing to make that happen for you, because our elections are sacred. So does Commissioner Fisher or Commissioner Shull, do you want to say anything? Or?
Commissioner Shull has his hand raised.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Sherry Hall and staff, and also to the volunteers that make our voting process so professional. Thanks for your attention to detail. Question for Jody Cochran. In your report, you said that electronic systems and equipment and software was not audited. My question is, by what means is the electronic equipment and software audited or checked?
Thank you, Commissioner Shull. I appreciate that. And I am going to speak a little bit to the statutes that address this. And I want Sherry, please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But so as part of this particular internal audit, that was deliberately not part of the scope. We defined our scope and it did not address the electronic side of this processing. And absolutely a critical piece of the entire elections continuum. There are processes in place, and I want to say that it is ORS 254, and Sherry and Bill help me with that speak to what are the auditing requirements that are established by the state. And the rule 165007045 Zero is risk limiting audit provisions. So there are steps in place that say for every election, there needs to be a process of auditing to make sure that those electronic systems are operating within the parameters that are expected. And so that occurs at every audit, at every election, and in some form or another. And so that was one of the reasons that this was not included in the scope, but really from the internal audit's perspective, we defined the various aspects of the continuum and focused on the physical security and the processing of those ballots for this particular audit. Other aspects of the elections process that have additional risks associated with them are also open for those assurances and those activities. But there is a process in place that allows that to occur at every election process.
Okay.
And Sherry, did I misstate that?
You did, and the risk limiting audit, every general election, we are given 3 races and 3 precincts within each race by state elections to go through to do a hand count, which is a risk limiting audit. And you can, what happens is we hand count and it comes out the same as the machine count, which proves that the machines were operating correctly. But that's
Okay, Clerk Hall. So when that check is done, do you report that to
the state?
Okay, and do we see it here at the Board of Commissioners?
You can if you want. We can do that.
Yeah.
I don't think we normally send it to you, but we can. It's all public information.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Fisher, then Commissioner Savas, and Mr. Cloran has raised his hand. Bill, do you want to answer what was just addressed? You're on mute, Bill.
You, Bill.
So the couple of things that are unique about the Oregon election process is that we do not use electronic voting machines, that our voters vote on a paper ballot. And going forward, I think that it's important as a policy matter to keep in mind what the strength of that system is. And as Commissioner Scho has asked basically about the reconciliation, the ultimate test of what those machines are doing, to most of us, they're black boxes, but the ultimate test of what those machines are doing comes when you have an opportunity to go through the process of comparing the actual paper ballots by hand using a statistical sample with what the machines did in terms of counting. And that occurs in 2 forms. One is the form of the risk limiting audit, which Clerk Hall and which the auditor have discussed. The other time that it comes up is when we do recounts under the statutes in connection with the elections, because the election of those particular ones have been close. There are a number of very important security features that are connected with that paper ballot and with the ballot styles that we could discuss, but it would probably take far too long for this particular meeting. We'd be happy to do it at another time, but the paper ballot optical scan system that Oregon uses is probably one of the most secure that you could have in terms of tallying. It is very important to get all of this right. People pay a lot of attention to what goes on at the national and state level, but the actual services that are delivered to the people of the state of Oregon, not funded, not policy, but the actual services that are delivered by county and local governments. And when those elections go on the ballot with other matters, very often the size of the districts involved and the margins on the local elections are small. So it's very important. We appreciate the effort of the auditor. It's very important to get those small races right. You don't want to just look at the overall statistics for what happens in margins of error and things like that in national and state, because at the school board level, at the water district level, at the county commissioner level, that's important stuff. And the services that people actually get come from those public bodies. Policy may be made and they may be funded elsewhere. So that's one of the reasons that the auditor chose the special election to look at, is because that's where the rubber really meets the road. And that's why we're continuously trying to improve the process.
Thank you, Mr. Cloran, for that explanation.
Commissioner Fisher, then Commissioner Fisher, then Commissioner Savas.
Okay. And then folks, I think we should think about wrapping up. Give us a few minutes for the next meeting, but go for it, colleagues.
I am with Judy on that. I'm not quite understanding what the.
Sonia, there's something going on with your microphone. You're all garbled. Yeah.
It usually doesn't garble. Is it more stable now?
It sounds like Mars Attacks.
Yeah.
I guess I will put something in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, so one thing I want to verify, Sherry, or Clerk Hall, and that is that watching the national news following the last national election, concerns about, computer hacking and somehow, changing the results of elections from outside sources, outside of this country, whatnot, and tampering and so forth. And I remember my visit when I first, and several times that I've been in the elections counting office, not during elections and not around that, but, just during the normal course of things, doing the tour and you showing me the facilities and the new counting machines that we had purchased. My understanding is that those machines are all standalone, and that they are not connected to the internet, that they are isolated from the internet. So though they might have electronic counting devices within, the firewall essentially is the fact that they're not connected to the World Wide Web. Is that still the case today?
Yes, it is still the case. We have 6 units of tally machines, and the ballots are scanned through each tally machine, which has a thumb drive in it. And then once it's totaled, that thumb drive is removed and put into a central computer that is just our tally system computer. And that's the machine that adds all of the ballot totals together. And we are not able to print a total from that main machine where all of the thumb drives are put in until about 20 minutes before 8 o'clock on election night. So nobody can ever total it to see what the trend is. And then those results are hand entered, and yeah, there's no hacking really available.
Great, but that answers my question. I think that's just, I think part of the concern out there that people are not aware of how our system works. And thank you. You've answered my question, done well. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, commissioners, because one of the other things I just wanted to say, as you said, Paul, with all of the expensive equipment that you've approved and paid for, I just feel very fortunate to have commissioners that do pay for what we say we need. All counties are not that fortunate. So, thank you.
Commissioner Fisher has typed her question. I'll read it. I would like more information regarding what is involved with confirming inspection control log batch reconciliations. I understand that the clerk does not want to do this as it would add expense. I would like to understand what the expense would be, and in balance, would it be worth the investment?
And that's county.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to let Becky take that question.
So that recommendation was for every batch that comes from the sorter that has a printed tag from the sorter saying, I put 125 ballots in this batch. Hand count them at the table, and then to confirm it, the numbers, once we scan them, match the vast majority of the time. And counting by hand adds an excessive amount of time to the processing of every batch. It will lengthen the amount of time it takes us to get through our ballots in a large election. This was not a large turnout, it was very small turnout, as district elections are. And to do this in a large election would add days to the processing of ballots. And when we have that number that comes from the machine, and then we have that number that we've scanned in, if it says the machine said I sent 125, the table says I pulled one because it was for the wrong election in the correct envelope. And the scanner says I scanned 124, and I have that one that was pulled out with the batch number written on it. That batch is completely resolved right there. So we have a very, very few times when it doesn't match, and maybe the table forgot to write the number on. If that number doesn't match, you stop right there and the two managers reconcile the batch. So we know where every ballot is.
And just an example of numbers of returns. The May 21 election, which was audited, the total returns were 85,275 ballots. The November 2020 presidential, the total returns were 260,538. And the recommended would mean counting all of those ballots by hand. So you can see how much longer that would take.
And then Commissioner Fisher responded, thank you. Jody, with that explanation, do you change your recommendation?
Sorry for the typing. Actually, I firmly believe that there's an opportunity for us to enhance our reconciliation process. And I agree that the hand counting may add some additional time. I don't know exactly what that time would be. It might be worth a pilot to see what that adds as far as time. I did time quite a bit of the processing. It took between 12 and 17 minutes on average. And Becky, let me know what you think as far as that observation, to go through a process, a complete process at those opening tables. So that's about how much time it took. There's normally about 4 individuals at a table. Sometimes there's 2 or 3. And so again, dividing those, they do process each individual envelope. So I definitely want to make a recommendation that is both effective in enhancing our assurance that every ballot is reconciled and every envelope is reconciled, but also that is an efficient bang for your buck, right? Never looking to make a recommendation that is more expensive than the value that it's returning. So I do believe that there's some opportunity. We've talked, Becky and Sherry and I have talked about what does it look like at that reconciliation point that they spoke to within the tallying room, and how can we continue to analyze this risk and determine what would be an appropriate enhancement to the processes. So I do believe there's opportunity. I do believe that there is a very small percentage of unreconciled amounts that would be addressed with these enhancements, but I do believe, to Mr. Cloran's point, that every ballot is important and every envelope is important. And so that was the vein in which the recommendation was made.
Okay, and with the reconciling each batch, I've asked Becky to speak to the fact of the balancing of the ballots at the very end.
When we certify the election to the state, we must provide a reconciliation. And we must provide an explanation if we do not reconcile between what we've scanned into OCVR, the Oregon Voter Registration System, and check the signatures, and what we've scanned into the tally system, both ends of the system, we have to provide a reconciliation for that, and which we do.
Commissioner Savas has his hand raised.
Yeah, so the way I hear this is that it sounds like the reconciliation process that's there today is basically done by machinery, and there's a balance. And I understand that. And I can also, from experience, know that if we hand count it, there's probably more chance of human error. That would take even more time. And if you have, let's say, a national election and there's 200,000 ballots, that's far different than, that's going to take a lot more time. So I just wonder if another alternative might be to have another machine to do a triple reconciliation as opposed to a hand count. If that doesn't better give the level of security and eliminate the chance for error, and also make it more expedient for the county.
Answer.
Well, my suggestion, I know that Chair Smith said a pilot project might be a good idea. Maybe one of the possibilities is for us to keep thinking about this and come up with other options, or to look at a pilot project as we work with the clerk and move forward.
Are you talking about a pilot project of hand counting each batch?
I'm not sure what it would look like yet. I'm assuming
because we used to do that.
Yeah.
And the reason it was put aside is because of the time it took.
So Sherry, just to clarify, Jody mentioned a pilot program on recommendation number 4.
And that's the one we're talking about.
Yes, and whether you were doing a pilot project just on the hand count portion of it or the sorting of it, I don't know. But, it's something that we can mull around and consider, and you can consider as well, Sherry. I don't recommend a presidential election to do that.
Well, and the other thing, I think you're all aware of is the fact that as of January 1st of this year, we're accepting a postmark of election day, but we can accept those ballots up through 7 days past election day. So it's not going to be like all the results on election night.
Right. Because of the Oregon legislature changed the law, not
yes.
because of you.
They did, yes.
Mr. Cloran has his hand raised.
Yes. What I would like to clarify is that when we're talking about this recommendation number 4, and we're talking about time and we're talking about money, in the case of recommendation number 4, it is more a question of time than it is money, because there are hard reporting deadlines that the clerk has to meet when it comes to reporting the elections. There are also public expectations about when various ballots are going to be reported and counted. And I suspect that with number 4, that we're talking more about the ability to complete the process within those timelines and within the expectations than we are with money. That this may be a problem that a clock can solve, but a dollar can't. So when we're looking at that is something that it is important to consider. The other thing is, when it comes to public confidence in elections, most of the literature that I look at, and when I look at elections worldwide, for some reason, the majority of the public don't understand that the election is not certified until sometime afterwards. And they expect results, substantial results, to be coming in, and they become suspicious of the process when the polls close or the deadline comes and there's not an immediate report or something that comes up very quickly. They're sure that something's going on in the background. Well, some of that something may in fact be going back and reconciling this, but I think that that's something that needs to be kept in mind. And the auditor throughout the process, which took a good deal of time, it wasn't a case of Jody coming in and looking at things for 8 days and then walking away and writing a report. She worked very hard on this along with the staff to look at these things. And the conversation around the ones that there isn't complete agreement on is very important to the process and a part of the process. One of the functions of the audit is not for the auditor to come in and to fix all the problems that you may have or the process improvements that you might put in place, but to focus on a part of the process for further review that is going to be ongoing. So
Thank you for that, Bill. You mentioned that the people expect timely reporting of the elections. They also expect huge accuracy, and I think that can be messaged. Number one, the law has changed on counting ballots 7 days afterwards. I do think it's up to the clerk's office to not only message ahead of the elections how quite possibly, because of changes in the law, the election results will be delayed. I think that is just a no-brainer. And secondly, we are in an era, as you know, a lot has changed. The expectations of our electorate has totally changed. And I think if we honestly tell people, we can certainly release some of the data at 8 a.m. or 8:15 on election night, but we may not have another report, 8 p.m., but we may not have another report at 10:30 or 10 p.m. like we always do. I think that needs to be messaged. I think people want accuracy and they want honesty, and they really want us to step up to the plate and meet the expectations. So that's just my opinion. And you know what? And we're going to be long on this, and I'll shut up now.
Is what you just said, Chair Smith. When we post results on our website, we also post the time when the next update will be posted. So that is announcing it to everybody. But as an example, with last presidential, we didn't complete counting the ballots until the Friday after Election Day because of COVID and because of way fewer temps working that election. And what?
And heavy returns on Election Day.
Heavy returns. We need to adopt Canada's law and not release any results until the election is certified.
All right, folks, I'm going to do a process check here. It is now 10:56. We do have another meeting at 11. Gary, I see 3 remarks in the chat, 2 from Commissioner Fisher and 1 from Commissioner Savas. Can you read those for us? Can you just...
Yes, Commissioner Fisher had said, can we promote a path forward that threads the needle between what Jody is recommending and what is feasible? Commissioner Savas writes, I would support a pilot of an additional mechanical electronic machine to ensure a reconciliation. Commissioner Fisher writes, she also supports a pilot of whatever means will assure the greatest accuracy of our process.
So, yes, Sherry?
I didn't hear the last word. Accuracy of what?
Our process, accuracy of our process.
Thank you.
So I'm going to make a suggestion here, folks. I think that we've made a lot of progress. Chair Smith, I hope you agree with me on that. It sounds like we need to continue the conversation, potentially about how we interact as fellow elected officials. And I believe Sherry's doing a phenomenal job. I think we will all agree to that too. But it sounds as if we could have additional conversations in the future. Maybe potentially a pilot project looking at more a mechanized way of reconciliation. And I guess from my perspective, I think we need to move on to our next, unless there's any other comments that people want to make, because we're now at 10:57. So for the good of the order. Okay, all right.
Let's take a break, Martha.
Let's take a break. Let's take a break for, what do you say, about 10 minutes or?
Yes, 10.
Let's do 10 minutes. Okay.
But this meeting is concluded and we can sign off, right?
Yeah.
Back to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners policy session. We are now considering ARPA funding and BCC approvals. Gary.
Yes, you just said it well, Chair Smith. Thank you. So we have Nancy Bush, County Operating Officer, She and staff have done a fantastic job updating the documents with the data you've requested the last time you discussed this. And I believe she's spoken to all of you in one-on-one meetings to answer your individual questions. So Nancy, if you please go ahead to kick it off.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning, Chair and Commissioners. So all of you should have the packet. A couple things I want to cover before we get into the requests from the committee. Just to make sure everyone knows, we do have a vision statement that was provided from the committee in, I think, July of last year, which is Clackamas Strong and Recover and Thrive. And you also do have a purpose statement there as well that came to the commissioners in July. And then also it was, both of these were presented to all of you not long after everyone took office in January as well. So those are in your packet as well if we want to have that conversation. I also just want to mention that right now we are working under two rules. We have the interim rule, which will actually sunset on April 1st. And we did get the new rule, the permanent rule, which is actually we can use it now, but we have to use it starting on April 1st. So that just adds a little bit of complexity to some of the things that we've been talking to. However, I went through everything that you do have in your packet so far and went through to make sure that it was in the final rule, and that I don't think for anything we have right now, we have to make sure that we get things done under the interim rule. So that is really good news as well. So with that said too, and with the final rule coming in, one of the things I would like for us to have a conversation about today is deciding on whenever we're going to stop accepting possible projects for the Arpa dollars. I just got 5 in again on Monday, which of course you don't have in your packet because I didn't have a chance to put that in there. But they're coming in because everyone knows that the rule is now final. It is more robust than the rule we had before. The rule we had before was around, I think, 147 pages. The new one is 450 pages. So it's a little bit more robust. So we're starting to see some of those come in. You do in the packet when we talk about the considerations, there's things in there from fire districts, et cetera. So I continue to get those in. So I would like to have that conversation today on when are we going to say we're no longer accepting them. So today we would, what we're really asking today is we have 3 projects that we would like to have as a group, which is the committee that we put together to work on ARPA and to collect all the information and bring you all the detail. We have 3 things that we would like to have approved so we can move some things forward. The first one is the public health EOC COVID response through December of 24. We are asking for $4 million to be set aside for COVID response as part of the interim rule as well as the final rule. We are to use the public these dollars available for response for COVID. Public health does use any other funding that they may be receiving through either the state or the feds before they use this funding. And we would, very similar to what you're seeing happen with the dollars for cable or broadband, they would come to you and say, here's what we're using, here's what we're doing, those types of things. Any dollars that are not used for COVID response and recovery would be put back and given to the commissioners to say, where would you like to put this money? I will also like to say that we did talk a little bit last time about the federal money and the state money. The state money is $1.76 million that we have right now. It goes through the end of, I believe, if I recall, I'm sorry.
Nancy, the state money you're talking about is for public health.
It is only for public health, yes, ma'am.
So please identify those because this is kind of confusing. Thank you.
It is the state public health dollars, and it's 1.76 million right now that we have. And we are spending around $700,000 a month on COVID response. So that money will not last long, but they are spending it first. And the federal dollars we're getting from FEMA actually ended yesterday or 2 days ago. It ended on the 31st of January. So that's the first thing that we're asking for. We are also asking for $2 million in administrative costs related to ARPA funding requirements. The new rule is much more robust in this as well, letting us know that we can use these dollars to do administration of the dollars. Not only can we use them at the county level, which we really need to help get dollars out, and also to make sure that we're tracking the dollars so we don't have any audit findings. But also those organizations that may be receiving the dollars can also use some of the dollars that we may be giving them for administrative costs, but that would come out of their dollars. It's not coming out of this 2 million. And then the third thing is the temporary hotel sheltering and other warming shelter activities, which is a $156,000 ask. And this funding supplements what we are getting from the state to provide emergency response to inclement weather by providing temporary hotel voucher placement for houseless persons, etc. This money too, for example, if they don't spend it this winter, could also be used for cooling shelters going into the summer. So those are the three things that we're just asking for today. And then any other conversation that we need to have around when do we want to talk about projects? How do we work with the public? Those types of things.
Okay, Nancy, I have some thoughts, and I just have some ideas here. Now, is it correct that we have $8.2 million left to spend on this first round?
Yes, so sorry, yes, I did not.
All right, you have submitted $7 million in spending plus $156,000 for shelters. Number one, public health does not need $4 million today.
This is true. They do
not need $4 million today.
We are asking
they would like $4 million today, and hear me out. Okay. Commissioners, I want you to put something in your mind and just think about. We can fund an additional $1 million to public health today and set aside the other $3 million. And I'm going to submit some ideas here. We have to do the administration costs, and we have to do the, we already, I think, spent money, Nancy, on the PERS taxes for essential employees. Has that already been spent?
Yes.
Okay, so the balance is not 8.2, it's 7.2.
So the balance is, so if you will look at your ARPA funding approval sheet, the balance is actually 8.242.
Does that include a $1 million payment in PERS?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm just making sure of that information because, you know, you mentioned that. Okay, now, and I know every commissioner wants to spend money right now. I'm going to put this idea in your mind belt. Do you realize any monies that we don't spend is held in the treasury and interest is earned on that? Our interest earnings on this money is unrestricted. I want you to consider that going forward in light of possible future budget hits. Unrestricted funds. Now, the 40 million that came in is in the treasury and it has already been earning interest, and I don't know the dollar amount on this. I checked with Brian Nava. And yes, this is legal. He sent me an email. I'm sorry I didn't get the email to you, but just think about that. What really needs money today to spend on? And I'm not saying abandon public health, but $4 million for public health just to set aside like that, they need to come back to us and show the need, just like everybody else. That is going to be my recommendation. There's also some other things that are, in fact, I'm going to propose something here. Each commissioner could take $900,000, and we still have some money left over if you want to do it that way. Habitat for Humanity, Martha Schrader, has a project, $800,000. Oak Grove Library, $800,000, Paul. Fairgrounds, $800,000. So I'm not sure what you want to do. Mark Schultz, Canby Fire Department, $33,500. So we might want to look at it like that. And then whatever the remainder is, we just keep in the treasury earning interest. So that's my spiel. I see Commissioner Savas, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair. I came here today recognizing the ask the staff is making for is laid out. I don't have a quarrel with, just dealing with the immediate ask, the 1 million versus the 4. I think the way that Nancy couched it, I think it was similar, frankly, that just basically held in reserve. I kind of get that, but having the backstop of having to come back to us, I think was also, I think she inferred that would happen. But maybe some clarity on that would be good, because I thought that was really clear on other things that were not internal, but we can get clarity on that. I don't have a problem with that. I do want to say that and just plant the seed, and that is that, this ARPA money is federal money. We know that. We know that staff are spending some of those dollars, health department, H3S, on things that are more state mandated than they are federally mandated. It's been my belief that I spoke to Gary about this, that we should be recalibrating our COVID response and staffing accordingly as time changes. For example, it appears to me that every report we've got back from our staff, and this is not, staff are doing great work. This is not a criticism, it's an observation. But every report we got back on contract tracing, for example, has not been very effective in the sense that they said, well, a lot of these people don't answer the call, they don't respond. But yet we're still spending a lot of time and staffing on contact tracing. I also, know that congregate settings are state licensed facilities. That seems to be a state responsibility. And if there's cost in that we're incurring with our staff for a state licensed state facility, whether that's private or a state-owned facility, it's still regulated by the state, that the state should bear the cost. I guess what I'm really getting at here is that I would hate to use these federal dollars that have a lot of flexibility for state mandated things versus federal mandated. And I think the state should be picking up the tab for state type of things and that we're responding to COVID with. That is not really, that's not a criticism at all to the state or to the feds, but I really think there needs to be a recalibration and the state should pick up somehow. And I know that the CARES Act, and I say this because, and maybe it's a different story in Washington County and Multnomah County and Portland who got the direct funding, but we were on a reimbursement basis with CARES Act. They got a lot of money. They got a lot of our money. We never even saw, and don't have to our avail. And it's $50 million probably, as I recall, roughly $50 million of our money that they have. So I would hate to see these rare dollars, those once in a lifetime ARPA federal dollars, be used to backfill monies that we should have got in the first place.
I agree with that, Commissioner Savas. I want a point of clarification, Gary. What's happening in the county with contact tracing?
Yes, Philip Mason Joyner, our public health director, briefed you all a month or so ago that we are starting to pull back on contact tracing and instead focus on vaccinations and boosters. So you're right, Commissioner Savas, it is not shown to be as effective in general. So our staff is already walking back from doing that work.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right, Paul. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Paul. Finish.
Yeah, thank you. And so I just want to close. I didn't have much more to say. I just wanted to really close with, I think we need to be looking at the next allocation for the remainder of the 81 million, which is $40 million in April or May, whenever that comes, and kind of look at how we, I don't see them as two separate. I think we're so close to that period of time that we ought to be factoring that and not really looking at what's left of 40 million, but really what we have on the table with knowing that we have 40 plus the remainder we're here talking about today to work with. So it's not as though the door is closing. The door's still open with that next allocation of dollars that's about to happen. So that's what I have for today. And I'm happy to, take the staff recommendation with the caveat that Chair Smith had laid out with making sure that we give the staffing portion, the 1 million, what they need now. And as the needs increase, that we just make that accommodation as needed. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Paul. Something else I want commissioners to consider is the Fed has come down with their standards, rules, or whatever. I think this board needs to consider our own criteria on how we're going to spend the next 40 million. And I think we need to recognize that it's one-time funding. And Commissioner Schrader has always said, as one-time funding, NACO even recommends that we don't do program development or hire FTEs, that it really is a sticks and bricks situation that we probably should be funding here. I also think that we need to touch all sectors of the county. I think the rural county has been totally ignored in this, and I'm going to continue to fight to get at least a recognition of that. We have the suburban, we have the urban, and the rural hasn't even been touched with this. Well, it's assumed, well, if you have COVID, well, I think it should be very apparent to us when they first started putting out vaccinations, our folks weren't driving to Portland. And Clackamas County was one of the most vaccine hesitant because they're not going to drive an hour to get a vaccine and wait in line. It just didn't happen. And the fact that Clackamas County has a good vaccine rate is because, upon my recommendation, I says, Philip, get vans and get out to the rural community and deliver them to the people and open up the pharmacies. And he did very good. So we really need to target underserved areas. We need to have recognize it's one-time funding. And I think each one of these little communities can use something, maybe more than the $33,000. And for instance, Colton Fire has requested $35,000 for some type of, what was it, Nancy?
It was 33.5.
30, but it was for some type of defibrillators.
Yes.
And Canby Fire has, a same one too. And so I'm really, really watching that. I don't have a problem with $156,000 for the shelters, the warming shelters or the cooling shelters. It's February. Remember, we had an ice storm in February. We still could have cooling coming up and snow. I don't know. We could have heat this summer. I don't have a problem with that. But I do want to listen to each commissioner and get your opinion on this. And I see a couple hands up, Commissioner Scholl.
Yes. I want to see this money go out across the county to assist the people out there who have not had the benefit of any of this money so far. Now, on essential employees, we've pushed out 4 million. On public health, behavior, and EOC, we've pushed out 1.5 million on the first installment. We got 1.5 million out on the second installment. And so the idea is to spend 4 more million on public health and EOC as we are in a time of waning COVID when we've already pushed 3 million bucks out there. I don't see that. The other thing too is I'm going to get questions like, you can't believe on this $2 million for Clackamas funding administration for Arpa funding. That has got to be justified in some way that I can share it with the constituents without getting myself in a whole lot of trouble. We've got stuff on here. We've got libraries. We got the fairground barn. We've got CCOM requests that everybody's going to be able to benefit from in some way. I just want to see this stuff go out, less money spent here at the flagpole in this building, and more money earmarked to help the people in this county. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Nancy, can you address the administration costs and where that number comes from?
Yes, the administration cost is, we need to hire some staff that includes staff to help get money out. For the businesses, for example, for the nonprofits, the dollars we already have tagged there to go out, we need some help getting that done. We also need, there's softwares that we could purchase as well that helps those communities as well whenever they get the funding, because they are under the same structure for reporting. And we just got a report in on January 31st, and it is very intense. Businesses and those nonprofits do not have the staff or the training to do that. So it's also for training those individuals, it's for the software itself. And it's also to help us to actually do the reporting, because we want to make sure, it is my job, I feel like I take this very personally, it is my job to make sure in 10 years when there's an audit, there's not an audit finding and we don't owe the feds a dime back. And we need staff to help us do that, and we need a contractor to help us do that.
And I would agree. And there's also some federal criteria that we must answer to. Nancy, we have an audit. The administration has an audit coming up this year for Title II and Title VI monies, which is the federal spending dollars. So it's not 10 years from now, commissioners, it's right around the corner. And Mark, that's one of the reasons why that number is so high. I've also been told by outside sources, the administration of funds like this could be anywhere from 10 to 15% of the gross. So consider, oh yeah. And so we at least need, I think, to fund what the ask is, admin of 2 million. And it's not, I know it's not fun. Commissioner Schrader, your hand is up.
Trying to thread the needle here, and as far as, you mentioned $800,000. I'm still working with the city of Lake Oswego to see if they're going to commit. Okay, so I don't know where that is. It's whether or not we can commit and then see if they can commit. They have the property for habitat, but I didn't really want to talk about that. I do think we need to keep the money for administration for sure, because if we don't have the capacity to get the money out and we're not really doing it in a way where, again, Nancy said 10 years from now, I'm okay with that piece of it. I liked your idea of public health. Maybe at least let's put $1 million towards it now, and then let's see if we can add the additional dollars and keep that aside. And the reason I like that is because, I'm not sure that this, the dogs are barking, so I apologize.
That's okay, just ignore them.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure that COVID is really going to be on the wane. I think it's going to become endemic. In other words, I think it's going to be something we probably are going to have to constantly deal with. And I do think that public health in terms of vaccinations and, testing is kind of a core function that we need to keep providing, but I would be willing to adhere to your idea of let's start with 1 million and then let's move ahead and as if we need more. And I think part of that is because it's true. We didn't get what we needed from CARES. We were shortchanged. And so now we're having to use another pot of money for something that we should have had fully funded initially, in my opinion, by the state. They should have given us a full amount of money that we needed to do that. So that's kind of where I am with things. I really want to let Nancy know they've really done a fantastic job. It's been a lot of hard work on their part. And, we will have a chance the next go round to have another 40 million that we can really align with our, with our values and where we're going as a commission. We've already done
values and criteria.
Criteria, right.
And there's also a solicitation process. Like Nancy says, we'll keep getting requests. I think that we're just going to have to put a stop application date on some of this stuff. These last minute requests, we on this round, we can't, I don't think, see how we can even consider them. I will say one thing. A lot of this funding requests are psychological in that people look at Clackamas County and they think, oh, you're going to get $80 million. Wow. Well, I need this and this and this. And they think $80 million is a lot of money. And they think, rightfully so, that their program is the best program out there and it needs funding. And I'm looking at these initial requests for funding, and I think they're hugely overinflated. The asks are huge. just huge, because they think we have $80 million. I will submit, we do not have $80 million. We never did, because half of it, or a good percentage of it, is mandated, and another percentage of it, 10 to 15%, is for admin costs. So I think we need, even commissioners need to get in that mind belt. Commissioner Fisher, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question and then I have some comments. So Nancy, what has been our process to garner requests from the community for these dollars? Have we put out like requests for proposal? Did we do any, did we solicit thoughts, or did they just come in, the ones that have come in?
So a lot of, we did not do like an y'all come, like we didn't send a blast out to the whole community, say, but we did have information that went out through partners like with H3S, Fire Defense Board. The cities have their own dollars. So Gary and I have been in conversations with cities too, to see where they were. We talked about pulling money together at some point, but no, we did not send you all come out. It was through different avenues, and using the rule, the rule that we did have to say, well, what do we know is eligible?
Okay, so Kimberly did for me what I want each commissioner to have, which is an organization of every request that came in from the public and every letter of support put in order, because we got all this sort of mishmash. We got through the BCC mail, which we would see in our BCC communications, but it's a letter here, a letter there, and it's all coming at us in all different ways. And it wasn't presented to I don't believe to our entire commission in an organized fashion. I had a talk with Gary yesterday, and it says, why isn't all this wonderful compilation of information that Kimberly provided for me just put on the website so all the commissioners could easily see it and we could approach this process transparently? So I don't know how my other commissioners feel, but I feel like I got a ton of questions after really having the time to review the letters from the public and the different proposals in a way that is more organized. So I would say that for today, I guess I'm looking to you, Nancy. You can shake your head yes or no. I like the idea that money gets interest if we don't need it immediately. So if we can do what Chair Smith is requesting, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't want it to create an administrative struggle for our staff either. If they know they're going to need the dollars, I don't want them to be caught between a rock and a hard place when we have this important work to do. So in regards to the public health, the other immediate issues as far as the administrative costs, no, we have to, sorry folks, we have to have the infrastructure because we have to report on this. We cannot afford to mess this up. We really need to move forward. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with the sheltering. So I would say that for today, we should go ahead and approve those first asks. And if there's not a problem with it, Nancy, as far as I know, do what Chair Smith suggests about public health. And then for the other things, could we have some sort of public process? Could we ask some of these, the folks that have made these excellent requests? I mean, they're so good, to come before us in some way so that we can ask our questions. And that's my second question. Then my third question is, can all commissioners, can we get this info? I think it should be public, the information that's all been, that I'm looking at. I don't know, Gary, I'm looking to you. Can we put this on the website so that people can see it, and it's easy to find for commissioners?
Chair Smith, do you mind if I?
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of questions I think I heard from you, Commissioner, is, for the public health dollars, what Chair Smith is saying is, we could put that $1 million aside. Yes, I think that would work. I mean, if depending on, how things go, we're all hoping it starts going down. Just be aware that we may have to come back depending on if we get more state funding, if we don't, those types of things, and where COVID ends up. So I am supportive of that, absolutely. I think the other part, you talked about the public process. I do know that Dylan Blaylock is going to be talking to the commissioners, I believe, next week. And there is, the process through town halls and those types of things. So I think he's going to be talking about ARPA maybe as part of that process too, next week as well. So that is one way. And we can also obviously talk about other ways we can get information out and making sure. We did a survey early on and we got a lot of information at that time, but we haven't done a lot. Recently, we do media releases and those types of things, as well as we have a web page. Also, I just want to, this is something that Commissioner Savas talked about earlier. We don't know for sure when the second installment is coming in. We know it's no earlier than May, but the Treasury has not said when. I have a suspicion, and this is just my suspicion, it actually might come at the federal fiscal year. So I just want to make sure everyone understands it could be May, it could be November, because the guidance just says it will not be sent out before May of 22. So I also wanted to make sure that was understood. And that's all I have right now, Chair.
Commissioner Fisher,
Okay.
do you have anything more?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Smith. I just to say some of the questions we've all received and know that Safe Kids Coalition is making a substantial ask. I know from talking with folks that are serving our kids in school and other areas and our law enforcement, public safety, that child abuse has been on the rise during the pandemic. It is a really important issue that we all care about. What I don't understand from the information that I've received is what precisely would a allocation of ARPA dollars be used for. I see in the request, it's like temporary workforce to help deal, with the issues. I need more information because I get very concerned about creating an infrastructure that we won't be able to sustain, first of all. And then secondly, I am very concerned about the effects of this pandemic on our little ones. And you just think like my grandkids, one is 4, for 2 years, he's been dealing with having to wear masks a lot of times and the developmental challenges there. There are issues for children through this pandemic. I would like to see us be able to address it, but I'm not getting the how out of what these proposals, what the process would be. So,
well, and I agree with the child abuse situation. However, that's program development. As wonderful as that idea is, I find but if there's a sticks and bricks solution for a one-time funding for child abuse, I would consider it. About children wearing masks, it's not good. It's just not good. The spending of the ARPA dollars, I don't think can fix that. So anything else, Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, no, I just have more questions, and I don't know that we have to race to spend this, do we, Nancy? Where did Nancy go? You're at the bottom of my screen now.
I'm sorry, did you say we don't have to race to spend it? Is that what you? Yeah. No, we don't. No,
we can be thoughtful and engage in a process to get our questions answered. And I would like it if all of us could get the same information. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Part of my goal here today is start to clarify the process and criteria. Additionally, and I know that's kind of a big ask. We have 2 commissioners with their hands up. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, thank you. I've been listening intently. Good conversation. Thank you, Nancy. I think that last bit of information that you mentioned about when the money will come, it could be as late as November. That struck me. And I think it reinforces our need to really be careful with the remainder that we have available. Unfortunately, if it is a late arrival. That said, I do agree that the comments about whether it's sticks and bricks or things that are durable, I think we need to be able to look back and say, what did we do with these dollars and where can we point to Fortunately, the situation of the lockdown is not as severe as it was. Things are opening up. Kids are going back to school. People are going back to work. So I think I'm assuming that a lot of those initial needs and one-time needs, I guess I'll just tag on to what Commissioner Fisher spoke to as far as that spike in domestic violence, for example. That hopefully has flattened out a little bit, maybe come back down or is tapering off. I certainly hope so. It'd be nice to get some reports on that. But I guess where I'm going with this is, as far as Commissioner Fisher's discussion about opening it up, and making a public product or RFPs, I think we need to look at, and I kind of mentioned that earlier, I'll just be more specific, to look at that next batch of money, whether it's here today or not, is not the issue. And say, okay, how are we, what do we anticipate the cost for the ongoing costs for COVID related stuff and the things that the health department are doing, the admin costs, the overhead and all that, what's that going to cost? And start kind of budgeting for that block of money and see really what's left over from those initial needs, some of the sticks and bricks projects that we have an eye on, and so on. I wouldn't want to put the message out there that there's, we have $40 million available and we're going to open it up to a lot of these asks, whatever they may be, whether they're nonprofits or whatever they are. I think we need, if we're going to put out an allotment of money for RFP, maybe we can identify how big that block is, if it's like a grant program. I mean, almost expanding on our annual $250,000 grants or whatever. I mean, if we expanded that on a one-time level, in recognition of that, I think we need to put some sideboards on what that is, so we're not confusing or mismessaging what's available for those non-sticks and bricks and non-admin costs and not directly COVID related stuff. So I guess that's my big concern going forward, that we take some time out to figure out what that is. I have no quarrel with having a more clear process. I think everything has been pretty transparent and public. Every document related to ARPA that I know of, that I have comfort with, I've seen, I know it's public record. So a lot said, I'll stop there and looking forward to the next discussion.
Yeah, Commissioner Schrader, and then we have 11 minutes left. And
yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to be really quick. I did just get word that evidently Lake Oswego has put $800,000 towards their habitat project. It's land that they already have, and they look like they have a development schedule in place already. And again, they did approach us, but I just wanted to let you know that I just got that information. In terms of, I wanted to ask Nancy a quick question. So Nancy, we've already given a little over 6 million. We have like 6 million set aside for nonprofits. And we're going through an RFP, or we will go through an RFP process once we get the administrative stuff in place. Is that correct?
So we actually, for the $2 million that is for items, support items like sanitary items, those types of things. We just got an RFP process request into procurement for those $2 million.
Okay.
So with any luck, we will be able to start getting that out towards February. And then we're trying to, hopefully being able to hire someone to help us push the other stuff out.
Yeah, the 4 million, because that's what I told some of the nonprofit folks the other day. That was my understanding. And I just want to get it on the record that I didn't give them misinformation. That's correct. And that the holdup has been the administration piece. Okay, thank you. I'm done, Chair. So
okay, so after listening to all of my commissioners, I'm going to make a recommendation. Number one, I think we should instruct staff to come forward at a policy session and help us set criteria for the rest of the money we don't spend today and our future allocations. Our criteria that reflects commissioners' values and our county values, and then a process for which to distribute the money and a process of which applications are taken. I also will accept a motion to spend $1 million on public health, admin costs of $2 million, and 156,000, whatever that number is, for the shelters. Is that what we can agree on today?
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher, for making that motion, and Commissioner Schrader for seconding that. Any further discussion or additions? Hearing none. Shannon, could you please call the poll on this?
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Commissioners, thank you very, very much for your thoughtful consideration. Moving forward, we have a few minutes left. Sonia, I see your hands up. Anything else that needs to be said on this issue? Sonia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to let my fellow commissioners know I was texting back and forth and with Shannon, with member of the community, because the link apparently was broken. They couldn't get into this meeting right now. So I don't know how widespread that was, but there was an issue with this, with people watching today. So just wanted everyone to know that.
Thank you, Gary. Will this be replayed?
Oh, yes, this is recorded, will be replayed and posted online, yes.
Okay, Shannon, you had your hand up.
Yes, just so you know, it is also live streamed on YouTube. And so if people couldn't access the link, there's a link to,
okay.
they can go to YouTube.
Anything else for the good of the order on this issue?
Chair, I just put in the chat, I just wanted to say it out loud. You know, again, I just want to repeat after hearing from Nancy about maybe that later timing of the second 40 million. I really suggest we really look at the remainder of the money left of the 41 million and proceed strategically as far as timing and how we leverage that until those dollars are here.
I kind of think that's what I said.
Okay.
And we can do that at the policy session, Paul. Please put your input on that. Commissioners, put your input on the policy session that's coming up, keeping in mind it's going to take, some time. But you know what? We have time. That's the beauty of this. There's a huge relationship between time and money, and it will reward us well. Anything else for the good of the order? Gary?
Nothing else, Chair.
Well, thank you very much. With that in mind, we will adjourn this meeting today and see you tomorrow.
Right.
Bye-bye.